The defensive line will tell the story for the Dogs against Bama. I promise you.
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Georgia Bulldogs football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Jarvis Davis and Brian Gebhardt. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your $5 bet first, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. And the Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So it's time for Beck and Bobo to break free. We'll talk about that and how this game might impact the race for the Heisman. But first, let's talk about some big dogs possibly returning for the big game. So, guys, the biggest story coming out of Athens Monday is who'll take the field for the Dogs in Tuscaloosa Saturday, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. Also, hopeful for Mykel Williams to return, for Jordan Hall to take the field for the first time in this season. So for you, Jarvis, with Xavier McLeod back, what would it mean if UGA is able to unleash a full throttle D-line against what some say is a vaunted Alabama O-line?
You know what? To be honest with you, T, when you think about the defensive line coming into this game, this is the most important game for them. That's why I say it is very huge that these guys are coming back. Hopefully we get a Mykel Williams sighting, because I feel like if he's able to come back, you're talking about a potential to be able to have one of those type of games. Yeah. Not to say that, Alabama's offensive line is not good, but I am saying that there are some weak points on that offensive line that I feel Georgia will be able to take advantage of, specifically Mykel Williams out on the edge, because there are some things that, we understand, like Jalen Milroe is a different quarterback. Now, don't get me wrong, the legs are still a strong weapon. Is not as stronger than his arm when you talk about as far as making dynamic plays and being a dynamic runner. But I think overall, this defensive line is going to tell the story of how this game is going to go, because when you talk about gap responsibility, being able to stay in your pass rush lanes, because once this dude, he's been throwing from the pocket a lot more this year than he did last year. Yes. But the guy can still extend plays, and it's almost like two plays in one when he gets outside of that pocket, because you don't know whether he's going to run or he's going to throw that bad boy. And if he starts to run, Georgia has had issues in the past. So, yeah, I think the defensive line will tell the story in this one.
Yeah, and I think, Jarvis, you mentioned a good point as well. It could be the good for Alabama, but it could also be the bad, because, like you said, Jalen Milroe throws much more this year, and he likes to stay in the pocket. But what did I just say? He likes to stay in the pocket, as in sometimes he holds that ball a little too long, and that could be something that UGA takes advantage of. But for you, Brian, when you kind of look at this matchup, if this D-line is full throttle for the Dogs versus this Alabama O-line, I mean, what do you think that could mean for Georgia in such a big game?
Yeah, this is a massive matchup and a very important game for the defensive line. We haven't seen it all year in terms of everybody together for 4 quarters. And there's been a lot of what ifs about this Georgia team going back to last year with injuries more on the offensive side, but now we see it on the defensive side of things. You need to see what this team's about. And this has been the problem on 2 fronts, right? Bama's been the kryptonite and a running quarterback, a guy who can move, a guy who can get outside the pocket. So as much as he has shown, hey, I've got that ability to be in the pocket, and that's something I knew that he had in him, and I figured Kalen DeBoer would get out of him in terms of him being. And the other thing is the quick strikes that Jalen Milroe has had this year. I mean, some of their drives haven't been drives; they've been plays, and then it's over. They're in the end zone. It's 6 and
to Ryan Williams, to be exact.
That's what he did.
The 17-year-old.
Sure. But this is that type of game where you talk about, all right, the depth and the D-line and all of it, and it's so important. It's essential to contain Milroe in this game and make sure that offense doesn't get off to a hot start and really get that crowd into it in a big primetime matchup on Saturday.
And BG, that's a perfect segue into my next question, because like you said, Alabama, they strike quickly. So we know they have a potent offense, 63 points in the first game, 42 points the last couple of games. So what is something that this Georgia defense can do to try to exploit Alabama and keep them from getting off to a fast start? Because couple things, like you said, God forbid Georgia's offense gets off to a slow start yet again. But more importantly, you're talking about an offense with 21 touchdowns, and 14 of them came on, like you said, drives of 4 plays or less, which really isn't a drive.
Yeah, I need the spy. I need the contain on Milroe. I can't have the 6 to 8 to 12 yard little runouts, little rollouts, and he's able to pick it up, because I'd rather see Georgia try to go strength on strength. And it's like, okay, you've done this to the teams that you've played in Wisconsin and South Florida and like that, but they don't have that secondary and these safeties and this group. So I would almost rather let them try to beat you over the top earlier on and have the contain of, we're not going to let you get the underneath stuff, even though Georgia has really been more bend, don't break and kind of in between the 20s. So it's a little kind of counterintuitive to what they've actually been doing. But I'd rather see Milroe try to do it against that team first and slow him down in the run game and getting those chunk plays and try to force him into 3rd and long early.
Yeah. How about you, JD?
And for me, I look at it from the standpoint of, this is another opportunity for Malachi Starks. He has the potential to be able to have one of those type of plays, right? When you think about, being able to take the ball away and being that type of guy, because Milroe, he'll make some errant throws. Like he will miss some throws. Like when you just going back to that Wisconsin game, there were some plays that he actually missed, and I know it looked like a route, but Wisconsin lost their starting quarterback, for the season early on in that game, and they were playing against the backup. So when you think about it from that aspect of like, okay, yeah, they were able to do some things, but they just Wisconsin just didn't have the arm to be able to take advantage of some of the things that Alabama's defense. I know we're gonna get to that in a little bit, but for overall, I feel like this is a Malachi Starks type game, and they have to make sure that they tackle, because that Jam Miller, he's not going down easily. So you got to be able to make contact and boom and wrap up and put him on the ground until help comes. And I think that a guy like Ty Ingram Dawkins, this is another opportunity for him as well, because we've been seeing it. We've been seeing it in these first few games that the Bulldogs have played, specifically in that Kentucky game. But now I feel like you came back, you're back healthy, you're 100%. Hey man, if you want to go ahead and raise that draft stock, this is the game to do it. So.
Yeah, it's a get the bag Saturday. We talk about that. This is one of the
absolutely. It's gonna be so many scouts at that game.
Be looking at this one. This you go into the press box. It's gonna be half of the people from Georgia, all the people from Bama, and everybody from the NFL in that thing.
Sure. Yes. Yep. Everybody gonna have representation.
Exactly. Now, you guys, we kind of hinted at it, but let's talk about South Florida. They actually gave Alabama a little bit of a fit, because that game was 14-13 in the 4th quarter. So did USF maybe give a little bit of the formula for keeping Jalen Milroe in check by keeping that game so close in week 2?
I think they were forcing turnovers. Like, they were sloppy. Alabama was sloppy. They fumble snap right down there near the goal line, and you just don't, you don't expect Alabama teams to do those type of things. And I feel like when you come into that, and I don't think that's going to happen, because when you have the number 2 team in the country, some will say the number 1, including me, coming into town, like it's the coach don't need to say, hey man, I need you guys to really focus this week. Nah, I don't. But outside of that, I feel like this is going to be a chess match, like we talked about before we got started. This is going to be a chess match, and I think that if you see, Alabama out there fumbling snaps and all that stuff, like, it's going to be a long day, because I feel like Georgia will be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, Georgia needs to capitalize on the mistakes, like Jarvis said, and they haven't done it to great success really in the last year and a half. I mean, the turnovers were an issue last year in terms of the lack thereof. There's been the big splash plays, and we've talked a lot about like the Malachi Starks type interceptions, but it seems like there's kind of the extreme of it versus, okay, be able to force that out. And again, take the crowd out of this one on Saturday. I mean, you let the Kentucky crowd get into it. If you get into that similar type of game, that Alabama crowd is a little bit different. That's another level up on that. And they're going to be ready for this one because it's their first big one with DeBoer and without Saban. And there's a lot that goes into that too. But this is a team that will make mistakes and can make mistakes. Georgia just has to be able to capitalize on it.
Indeed, indeed. Well, speaking of capitalizing, we feel like it's time for Beck and Bobo to break free. We'll go into that when we go between the hedges. This episode of our Atlanta football party is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. So think about this. Sometimes you're just tired, like flat out tired. I mean, Sunday night, we actually had a late Falcons game. So we were kind of on the struggle bus Monday morning. That would have been a perfect time to use 5 Hour Energy. And I know I have done that in the past just to get me going. So whether you have a long list to do for work or a list of DIY projects to tackle at home, or you have a late night from work, take a 5 Hour Energy shot so you can check everything off your list. And if you're like me, you always have that large list of projects to do from home, and this is where it can kick in. Also, maybe before your workout, just to give you a little edge when you get in the gym, certainly that can help you out. And 5 Hour Energy shots give you that feeling of alertness and energy you need to get in the zone. And if I can say this, it also does it without that after effect or, feeling like you have a big high and then coming down on a big low. Why? With 0 sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. Also, they have some really great flavors: watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and more. There's a flavor for everyone. Berry's my favorite, but I encourage you to try them all. And on the site, you even have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack, and it's delivered right to your door. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5 Hour Energy product today, you can use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. Now, this offer is only valid until September 30th and cannot be used with other promotions. But if you want to check it out with promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order, go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, Brian. Carson Beck, of course, ranks 6th among SEC QBs in pass efficiency and 10th in passing yardage. Now, we've admittedly seen him look a little shaky so far this season, missing on some deep throws and even dropping that clean snap against Kentucky that made all of us gasp. And sometimes it just seems like Beck, and for that matter, you can even say Mike Bobo, maybe they're being too careful or maybe are not quite in sync. So what do you need to see? And what do you think we're going to legit see Beck and Bobo do to break things wide open against a very potent Alabama offense? And I don't want to say to keep up, but definitely to make sure that they come out competitive out of the gates.
The most important thing for me is to find a way to get this offense to stay on schedule, because they just keep getting behind and finding their way into 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. And there's no confidence right now in them being able to convert in those situations where it was, they were the best team in the country in 3rd down last year. And I got a number on that later. It's shocking where they are so far through their first 3 games this season. So one thing I really want to see is more stuff across the middle with some of those bigger body wide receivers, whether it be Colbie Young or Dylan Bell, who's not necessarily in terms of height, but in terms of physicality going across the middle, getting those tight ends involved more. I feel like a lot of it has been east to west, trying to soften up the defense before kind of hitting it in the middle. But I'd rather see them work the middle a little bit more, because the offense seems predictable right now. And if you have the DBs that are able to make those plays on the outside, which Alabama has a couple of them that are going to be able to make some of those plays, I just need to see more of those 5, 6, 7 yard gains up the middle of the field. So that's what I'm looking for on Saturday.
And how about you, Jarvis, in terms of what you want to see and what you think you're going to see with Beck and Bobo to hopefully break things open for this Georgia team come Saturday?
I feel like Carson Beck has the opportunity to put his legs on display, because the Alabama rush isn't as potent. I guess I'm saying this again. That Alabama defensive line, they aren't as, you don't have that one guy. You talk about Dallas Turner, like, you better be ready to roll, or that clock gonna have to be on time. You're gonna have to be on time, like BG mentioned, as far as just from inside your head, like, no, I have to get rid of the ball at this point in time. I feel like Carson Beck, not only just running, I'm talking about moving within the pocket, moving outside the pocket to be able to extend plays and put pressure on the back end of that defense that I feel like they can do because they have the necessary weapons to be able to get down. I'm talking about the scramble drill. Hey, when 15 breaks outside of that pocket, I need y'all to come back to him. Come find him, show him your number so he can get you to rock and you go out and make a play. So I feel like being able to use his legs, get outside the pocket, and take off, from time to time too, when you're able to do that. And that's going to help move the chains and help you stay in front of the chains and not be getting behind because, a lot of times when you get into third and long, that's a defense coordinator's dream. They're waiting on that. So like, yes, I'm about to send pressure. You only going to have 5 or 6 protected. I'm about to send 7. We about to lock up man, and we're going to make this thing happen. So yeah, I think that in order to stay out of those situations, Carson Beck is going to have to use his legs a little bit more in this big matchup.
Yeah, and you think about we were talking about the lines and how important it's going to be for these teams to dominate in the trenches. But of course, Georgia's going to be without its All-American, its preseason All-American Tate Ratledge. So for you guys, how much will that not having him kind of affect Bobo's game plan or kind of shift his plan for this weekend?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, I don't think it's going to shift it necessarily. Obviously, Tate Ratledge is a heck of a player.
Yeah.
When you're talking about a preseason All-American, he's a guy that probably going to be one of the better guards going into the 2025 NFL draft. But like, I feel like this is a game where you have to get the ball to Trevor Etienne. And I'm not just talking about turning around and handing it off to him because we understand that this offense can run through him.
Yes.
And when you think of that game against Kentucky and that towards the end of the third quarter in that Kentucky game, it gave it to him like 3 consecutive times in different ways, right? So when you think about it from that standpoint, like you have to start like that because we understand this dude is dynamic. Like I need to see it more because if he's dynamic, get him the rock so you can put it on display. And this is the perfect time to do it because, this is this is the biggest game on college football. It's Saturday night, 7:30. You better be in your seat and have your popcorn ready. So it's time for Mike Bobo to go ahead and put this man on display because if you do and it's successful, that's going to open it up. What BG talking about? Colbie, Young, Dom, Lovett, everybody gonna be running wide open if you start getting them to pay attention to one because one is that guy and he can make some plays for you.
Yeah, Tate Ratledge, one of the best interior offensive linemen in the country, but I don't think as far as game plan goes, it should affect it in any way as far as really anything that they do and anything that they call. And that's some of the things that Kirby preaches with the depth. Like we got to come in and be able to do that. And Georgia is one of the teams that does have that capability. It's crazy to lose a guy like that, but kind of a plug and play situation and know is the next guy up as good yet as him? Not necessarily. And the other point too is Etienne is the playmaker on this offense for the moment. So it needs to be more of him, and it needs to be more of him early on in this game. I don't necessarily need everybody involved and make sure everybody gets a touch here and there. It's like if you can get Etienne going and feed him, even if it's almost kind of like a force feed situation kind of early, and to move the clock along, get a nice long first opening drive possession where Etienne touches the ball 4 to 6 times. Like that's how Georgia needs to start off on Saturday.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right because when we think about it, as great as Tate Ratledge is, Trevor Etienne went off after Tate Ratledge was out of the game. So that tells you how impactful he can be, but also speaks to the depth that you just mentioned, BG, as well. But yeah, I would agree with you because the last couple of weeks when we've talked about the offense and we've talked about who Carson Beck has thrown to, it's been 5, 6, 7 guys, which is fine, which is absolutely fine. But the challenge with that is that probably really means you don't have a wide receiver one, if we're just being honest. And we've talked about that as well. So this might be an opportunity as well for someone to emerge as that player. So who for you guys, BG, who can or needs to, or you feel like has the best potential to maybe be that wide receiver one type of difference maker for this offense this Saturday?
I'm between 2 names. It started off the season with Dom Lovett, and I think that's sort of faded a little bit, and he's kind of gone back to the pack. So, of course, he is an option, but I think it's either Dylan Bell or Colbie Young. And I think the way that they get Dylan Bell the ball into different spots, and I know that Beck missed him a time or two, going back to the game against Kentucky, but good things happen when Dylan Bell has the ball, whether it's an end around or whether it's, getting him out in space. I just think finding a way to maybe manufacture a few touches for him as the game moves along. He's the guy I'd like to see more plays come from and through.
Thank you for mentioning the guy that I was going to mention, because it is Colbie Young for me, BG.
Yeah,
When you think about, I understand the red zone threat. We understand what he's able to do down there, but I'm all for getting this guy the ball between the 20s, because I feel like he's a mismatch as soon as he lines up out there, outside at that outside receiver spot. So for me, I feel like there's going to be some opportunities because of what Alabama brings to the table. And you saw South Florida make some plays. There were some plays that Wisconsin wide receivers were able to make. The backup quarterback Locke, he wasn't able to make the throw, and the wide receiver had a clear separation and everything like that. So I feel even though Carson Beck has been a little shaky when it comes to his accuracy early on in games. Like, hey, man, you're going to have some opportunity to make some plays early on. And I feel with this team, if they're running that offense through Etienne, we understand what the running game being established does for offenses. It makes calling plays so much easier. In this world of everybody want to throw the ball 40, 45 times, I've always been a big proponent of running the football, establishing yourself first, and then you can figure out what you can be able to take advantage of. And I feel like Colbie Young can be that guy to do that in this game on Saturday.
Translation: the football party and the post game want to have a Mykel Williams moment and a Colbie Young moment as well. That's kind of what we're shooting for, right, guys?
Let's do it.
All right. How might this game impact a bigger race? And that's the race for the Heisman. We'll talk about that in Next Up. This Atlanta football party is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So get this. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can actually check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet, and that's at FanDuel.com. So again, the season is 3 weeks in right now. So we're still kind of early into the NFL season. So it is a great opportunity for you to take advantage of FanDuel, which, like I said, is America's #1 sportsbook. Again, sometimes we'll be in the middle of the game and we kind of feel like we're getting a sense of what the outcome is going to be. At that point, go ahead and check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on that same page where you place your bets. So again, get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. Locked On Sports Today is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that's programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the noise. Locked On Sports Today also brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we've been talking about Carson Beck and Jalen Milroe this entire show. They've been a part of our combo and they remain a part of the Heisman conversation as well. So for you, Brian, how might the outcome of this game impact the race for the Heisman?
Yeah, I think two different things could happen here. If Milroe has a game where Bama goes on to win and it's 250 plus and, 3 or 4 scores for him, I think he kind of becomes the front runner for the Heisman. And for Beck, the way that he played against Kentucky, he kind of take that step back. If he's able to have a big game, I think he just kind of re-enters his name into that conversation. And you have those two different ones. Because Milroe right now, to me, is the guy. I think it's Cam Ward's right there in that conversation. Got Nico, the quarterback from Tennessee's kind of there. Jackson Dart. But this is one of the biggest games we've had all season, maybe the biggest outside of Texas and Michigan, even though that one's kind of changed as we've received that. So this is the biggest game, certainly in the SEC so far this year. So it's going to be pretty crucial. The other thing to keep an eye on too is, and this is something that's a month down the road, but Georgia and Texas play the same day that Bama and Tennessee play. And all of those teams are some of the most interesting teams in the country. So I think the winner of this game also secures a night game for their team that night. I think that they wind up being that game. So I think you're playing for kind of two fun things that are off the field in this game on Saturday.
Exactly. And just like BG said, Jarvis, when you look at FanDuel's odds, Cam Ward's at the top, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe has kind of jumped up there as well. Then there's Nico, Dylan Gabriel from Oregon, Quinn Ewers, and yeah, right at the bottom of that list, whereas he started the season at the top of the list, is Carson Beck. So yeah, this could be a very critical game for both of these guys. For Jalen Milroe, obviously, to jump to the top, the very top of the Heisman odds, but also for Carson Beck to get himself back into the conversation more seriously.
Yeah, and I think that for just from a personal standpoint, I feel like this is a bigger game as far as the Heisman goes for Jalen Milroe, because we understand the quote unquote limitations that he had coming in and wanting him to move to a different position and just trying to prove to people that, hey, I am a quarterback. You know, I remember when he was they were talking about the conversation he had with his dad, and you know, the coach had told him like, hey man, you probably need to think about moving to a different spot. And he said he had a conversation with the pops, and he was just like, man, dad was asked him like, do you want to play quarterback? He was like, yes. He's like, all right then, play quarterback. And you know, when you think about it from that standpoint, just to having a father to be able to go to, because when a father figure tells you something, especially when he's dangling that scholarship over your head, it's not as important as it is like it used to be back in the day. But you a lot of times, like, he's the professional, right? And he's the coach, and he understands he's supposed to have my best interest at heart. But when he was able to lean on his pops in that particular situation, I feel like there's a moment where personally he's taking that with him. That's probably going to be, if he's standing up at that with that Heisman Trophy in his hand at the end of the year, I promise you something. It's going to be a reference. It's going to be a reference there, because he's going to remember that, because you're going to have doubters when you are at a certain level in any profession, right? I mean, so for him, I feel like it's bigger for him. And then as far as Carson Beck goes, I really feel like Carson needs to tinkle or get off the pot, right? Because we understand his capabilities as a quarterback, but you only can talk about that for so long until you're saying, you know, well, maybe you just aren't capable of doing those things that we thought you could coming into the season. So I feel like this is the game that he has the opportunity to put himself back in the conversation. Like you said, FanDuel understands it too. Yeah, that's why he's been sliding his behind right on down those odds favorites. So for me, I feel like this is a bigger game personally for Milroe, but Beck needs to go. If you really want to be that guy, you got to prove it, man. You got to prove it. And this is the game to do it.
Yeah. And you know what we saw in Kentucky, he was one of the biggest concerns, because I mean, he really, really struggled throughout the course of that game. So when you look back at that game, and I know we're a couple of weeks removed from it, but when you look back at that game, maybe what was the biggest struggle you saw for Georgia against Kentucky that you know they can't afford to do or have again this Saturday?
They need to be able to run the ball, like in between the tackles, and they need to be able to do it early. They've got to be able to establish again with no go-to, like with not that set go-to wide receiver. Like they have to be able to run the ball early and often in this game, and they should be able to do it, you know, without Tate Ratledge against this defensive front. Because like Jarvis had spoke about, there's not really that guy on that. There's usually 2 or 3 guys on that Bama defensive line for the longest time that you'd have to watch out for. Now it's like, okay, take care of business, do your job. You don't have to be special or go out of your way. Like, just execute what you need to be able to do. But they have to establish the run early in this game.
Yeah, and I think there's a thing that Bobo probably needs to understand, like get into the flow of the offense. I feel like that script has to be so good this week.
Yes.
Like I think you have to establish, like, here's what we're going to do to you for the entire game. It's not just a 10 to 15 play script that, you know, hey, then we'll figure out what you're doing against us, and then we're going to make no necessary adjustments, which is what you're supposed to do. But the really good teams, great teams, they say, hey, here's what we're about to do to you, and you better figure it out. And if you don't, because we're going to do this thing for the entire game, we're gonna mix it up, and we're gonna come back to it, because we know that we can execute it at a very high level. And I think that coming out, establish yourself as a play caller in this game is going to be so key, because, like I said, this is not Nick Saban's Alabama team. Like, I know that's a very high standard, because this Alabama team can probably go out and beat a lot of teams in this country, if not all, most of them, right? So, especially in the SEC. So, but we understand what the level of they're being compared to when it comes to those Nick Saban teams. And I just don't feel like that is where we are right now. That's not what we're talking about. And I feel like Mike Bobo has to go out and prove that and expose them for who they are.
To get off topic here for 1 second, did you guys see what Cam Ward did against South Florida this past weekend in terms of the one particular play? When you talk about, showing somebody what you're going to do to them and then going ahead and doing it, it was a run from the one, but he plays like, we're going right here. We're going right here. And there's something about like when your quarterback does that and you're the rest of the team and you execute that play, and that just skyrockets your confidence. And not to say that like Beck and Georgia are going to do that on Saturday, but the idea of, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to show you what we're going to do. Try to stop it. It gives that confidence throughout the whole team, and that's on both sides of the ball. So.
And that moment is going to come up in this game at some point. And Beck has to be able to come through for his guys and show his guys like, hey, I'm that guy. I got you. When we're struggling, it don't matter what Bobo calls. I'm going to make a play and get this offense where it needs to go. So, that moment is definitely going to come.
And he might want to lean into the Kirby Smart school of thought because Kirby, he's always going to try to find a way to make you feel like, hey, we're the underdogs. Nobody believes in us, so on and so. Carson Beck, you might want to take that mantra and say, you know what? I've slid down on Heisman. Everybody's talking about Jalen Milroe this week and how great of a quarterback he is and a dual threat. And nobody's talking about me. I was the guy at the top of the mountain at the beginning of the season, so now I need to show and prove. So maybe he needs to kind of have that underdog mindset or do something that says, I need to be the one who establishes what this team is going to do in Tuscaloosa this weekend. Now, interesting little tidbit and nugget that I saw this past couple days when I was doing some research, getting ready for the show. Kirby Smart has won 21 straight games after having a week off to prepare. Kalen DeBoer has also won 10 games in a row after having a week off to prepare, which I think is really cool on both ends. But what do you think is going to have to happen for Kirby, first of all, to dial it up to make 22 straight games winning after having a week off?
I think it's just a matter of go ahead, Jarvis. You take it.
No, go ahead, BG. Yeah, you got it.
So I think this is one of those games for Georgia where like go in, capitalize on some of the mistakes that Alabama's going to make, stay on schedule offensively. Like this is one of those simple, like coach, go in and execute because collectively the rosters across the board, like you're a better football team than they are. That's a really impressive stat though, because what it shows is just both coaches are really damn good coaches.
Yes.
And I think with Kalen DeBoer, we talked about, we had a conversation a couple months back on our podcast here of who's that second coach in college football now with Harbaugh gone and Saban gone because it's Kirby and then it's who else, right? And and there's some names for sure, and Sark's one of them, but Kalen DeBoer is right there in that conversation of what he was able to do at Washington recently. So if he comes in and Bama finds a way to win, and they could easily win this football game, all of a sudden you start to look at Kalen DeBoer and Jalen Milroe and Bama completely differently, and they're capable of doing that on Saturday for sure.
Kirby is going to have to prove why he was one of the most, if not the most respected defense coordinators in this country and was hired to be the head coach of this team. And when you think about it from that aspect, I'm talking about throwing different looks. Kirby coached in the league before, throwing different looks at his. I'm talking about sending pressures, spying, not spying. Like I'm talking about, you got to really make this dude think, make him hesitate because you have the defensive line to get home. All you got to do is just give your the secondary and the secondary as well. I wholeheartedly believe in this secondary. I feel like there's going to be some moments in this game where if they're able to make Jalen Milroe think just for one more second or half a second, like they can put this dude on the ground. And I think that Kirby and Glenn Schumann right now, as we speak, are cooking up something that's going to make this young man think, oh, you want to make it to the league? Oh, you're going to have to prove it this week, Jack.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it is an exciting chess match that is coming to us Saturday night, and we are here for it. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. And of course, be sure to stop by Locked On Bulldogs for your second listen. And be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're free and available wherever you download your podcasts. We will see you on the Atlanta Sports Party Thursday.